So over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to present a few points about the what our education system needs to deal with as we go forward. We heard from J.M. Pillai sir about the extraordinary impacts that climate change will have. And we are talking not only about climate change, but also the loss of biodiversity, about environmental degradation. And these are going to affect the planet and life on planet in a very, very, impactful ways. But what we are focusing on here is the role of the education system and what we can do in Kerala in particular. I will be covering 4 main points. First is Dr. Veeramani talked about the seminar series. I want to give a little bit about why we need to do this. Why do we need to focus on education research? Second is about the link between climate change and environmental sustainability with education. What specifically do we need to look at? The third aspect is, which is to frame the issue in Kerala and how do we prepare the education system. I'm calling it, do we have one system or do we have several school systems? I'll be presenting some analysis, preliminary analysis, and then lastly, implications for policies. This is work in progress. As was discussed earlier, we started this work some time ago, but our rationale for the seminar series on education research in Kerala is that education research has been important in many, many countries. If we talk about Finland, Japan, Korea, Singapore, you name it, US, UK, of course, but even these newly emerging countries, China, Brazil, and so on, it has been a fundamental part of education development. But to my surprise, there's very little education research in Kerala. I'll show you some slides for that. There's some echo. I hope people can hear. If people on WebEx cannot hear, please contact Emmanuel. I think we had sent the details before. And so the proposed seminar series are on these 3 topics that Dr. Veeramani also presented. This is on climate resilience and environmental sustainability, the first one. The second one will be on future of work and future of education. And the third is on language, culture, and identity. We are thinking of these seminar series not just as a closed-door discussion between researchers, but with a broader audience, especially of the teachers, university faculty, research, media, government officials, and so on. And it's a collaborative exercise between VMFT, TIS, and CDS. Now, I said that there wasn't much work on education research in Kerala, and thanks to some work done by Swade, who is a PhD student here, was able to get some quantitative estimates of this. We looked at 4 big databases, and many of you are PhD students here. You know that these cover like hundreds of thousands of articles. Showed Ganga is, of course, a database of Indian PhD theses, but we've looked at, I mean, you're talking of literally millions of articles which are narrowed down then on education. If you look at the number of articles on Kerala education, excluding the PhD thesis, it's about 75 in a 30-year period. I'm talking about internationally peer-reviewed journals, those are acknowledged, not the ones that may be in university departments or in SCRT library. There are many of those, but nobody has seen them and we don't know the quality of those things. So over a 30-year period, that's what we have. And on climate change in particular, Mr. Pillai said that climate change has been an issue for 30 years at least, meaning understanding it has been an issue for 30 years. We have 8, or +3 if you add on Shod Ganga, it's 11 over the 30-year period. Even in the last decade, we're talking about 5. So the question is, why are we not having research? But even when you look at this, paltry number of studies, they're mostly quite generic with little to no real data analysis. Few studies have done some primary surveys. Many reference the Kerala model of education, of development, as you said, Dr. Viromani, but in a very general way. There's very little research on pedagogy, sociology, economy, and very limited methodologies or analytical methods. Just a handful of studies on climate change. So yet we have done so well in school education, so at least compared to the rest of India. So my analogy to you would be that we are like, a young person who is endowed with a lot of abilities or good fortune, or at a particular historical time, we raced ahead. Rest of India, we are still ahead. But then we did not do the training, the rigorous exercises that are required to become like a world-class athlete, to continue that analogy. So we are resting on our laurels, whereas others are actually doing deep education research. And I think that is a mistake for us, especially when we are facing new challenges such as that of climate change and the future of work and so on. So what is really the link with education? How should we look at it, and what kinds of research are necessary? Environmental education has been included in education curricula for several decades. I am not sure how effective it is. There is not much research on that. Globally, when you look at it, even in advanced countries, there's a lot of questioning about the efficacy of some of the curricula that have been developed and how they've been taught. Climate change, you can say, has only recently begun to be understood. And the way I would propose is, just for the sake of understanding such a vast topic that Mr. Pillai covered, that we can look at, education and climate mitigation, which means like, how do you reduce the impact of the human beings on climate through reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in particular, and the other issues that he talked about. And the second is climate adaptation. So in terms of mitigation, of course, education buildings and so on also cause, greenhouse gas emissions. Is a relatively small part, but it's mainly through the education curricula, by influencing young children or teaching them, not influencing them in the sense of propaganda, but really equipping them with the resources, with the methods of reasoning to be able to understand climate change now and in the future. We're thinking of 50, 60 years ahead. This is the generation that has to cope with it. And in terms of climate adaptation, the impacts of climate change, how do you make the system resilient? We had COVID, and for 2 years, schools were closed in Kerala. What happens when you have extreme climate events? We really need to think of alternative models of keeping education open, but also through education curricula about helping children and communities to learn about adaptation strategies. Now, if you haven't looked at the Government of Kerala's State Action Plan for Climate Change, I would strongly encourage you to look at it. It's the second version, 2023 to 2030. A lot of projections, detailed projections. It talks about the mechanisms of the direct impacts of climate change through temperature rise, rainfall, sea level rise. And of course, this is a snapshot, Mr. Pillai covered a lot more. But these projections are important because the government of Kerala has shown through its projections that there's a lot of increase in rainfall and increase in rainfall variability, and how the summer maximum temperature is likely to rise by 1 to 1.5 degrees centigrade, or 1.5 degrees centigrade to 2 degrees centigrade, according to different scenarios. But equally importantly, this is not going to be the same across Kerala. The northern districts will be more affected through heavy rainfall, extremely heavy rainfall also. And the coastal districts are at risk of sea level rise and large-scale sea erosion. So we cannot talk of climate change in one generic fashion, even in relation to Kerala. Despite this being a great resource, there's nothing much on education. So many sectors are covered: health, transport, etc., etc. Education, there's 2 pages, and most of it is about training administrators, not even about the curricula or anything. Maybe that is something we need to fix. Why is it that something as important as this does not have a chapter on education and about the kind of research that needs to be done? So my angle is, and we'll go into this more by, other speakers will be handling this. We again say there should be 2 categories of research. One is, how do you improve teaching and learning on climate change and environmental sustainability? What kind of curricula, materials and resources, pre-service training, teacher professional development courses. This requires research. We can't just say, oh, let's just do it. And, you need to think what needs to go into curricula for a 5th grader, what needs to go into it for a 9th grader, and you need to be able to teach the teachers and teach support them to be able to do that. But the other aspect is policy research, on which we have very little. How to make the education system resilient, how much financing is required, what data can be used for decision making. So all you PhD students here, please think about these topics as you go ahead. So on climate change curriculum and resources, Anu will talk about this more, but the kinds of research that I have seen being done in other countries is, you need to understand what is children's current understanding of key concepts, which we need to address. We need to analyze local impacts of climate change. It really is not enough just to talk about the Arctic or the Antarctic. We have to make it really understandable and comprehensible to our children in our local context. Not to say that's not important, but we have to link it up, and therefore this analysis needs to be done. How do you integrate concepts from earth, life, physical sciences across the curriculum? Because climate science and environment is not compartmentalized into physics, biology, etc. How to use climate data. These are very, very not easily understood data. So could be taught as part of mathematics and statistics. We have to explicitly focus on language demands. There's certain terminologies, there's certain issues that have to be understood by developing language. We completely ignore this when we develop new curricula. The other critical aspect is the engagement in reasoning. You do not want to be telling people this is how it is and that's just memorize it and produce it for the exams. So how do we encourage reasoning on this? And then the socio-emotional aspects about dealing with climate anxiety, which is now seen as a phenomenon from adolescents, especially across the world. And we have a speaker who will be speaking about that. So let me walk you through a little bit on why I say this is difficult to do, but not impossible. We have to really address the real situation in Kerala. I will talk about the analysis that we have started to do, using 3 big data sets, what is called the UDICE Plus, which is a school-based census that collects data on every single school from, it's quite amazing, from the village level up to the capital city in every single state, every single year, and has data on children, on teachers, etc., etc. I've not seen much analysis about it, but it's a great data set still, and it's verified by the state government. Then there's the national sample surveys. Many of you know, some are on education, the periodic labor force survey. I'll show just a smattering of findings from these first 2, just to whet your appetite. We have to carry on the analysis. But just in case I run out of time, let me tell you what the key findings are. in Kerala, we essentially have like three systems. We all know that: government, aided, unaided. We don't actually look at how these systems compare, but we see that enrollment is highest in government aided schools, followed by unaided, and then by government schools. Enrollment in unaided schools is actually higher at the primary level and elementary level, and it declines at secondary level. That's very puzzling for me. Government schools have a far higher share of below poverty line students. Maybe again, people think, oh, that's okay, that we know that. But let me show you some peculiarities about that. And almost all unaided schools teach exclusively English medium, and government and aided schools have mixture of English and Malayalam. Keep in your mind, we're talking about developing curricula, teacher professional development, and so on. So what is really happening with these children? You know, where are they? Is there so much movement between these government and aided schools? And when we talk about curricula, then which groups of children are we talking about? So let's start with this. If you look at this right-hand bar in both the panels, elementary level, the purple one shows how many are in private unaided. 31%. This year, on average, about 35% at the elementary level. When you go to the secondary level, okay, that drops to about 20%. So you have about almost a 15% drop in enrollment in unaided schools between elementary and secondary. And they're going, some of them are going to aided schools, some of them are going to unaided schools. But look at one more thing. Where does this decline take place? So these lines show the enrollment in absolute numbers in government, government aided, private unaided, and others. So government aided is the brown line. Okay, so look where the drop is taking place. The blue line of private unaided after class 4, quite a steep decline. And you see the unaided one, the aided one going up there at the same time. And then between class 7 and class 8, the blue line again dips, and you see the purple line, which is the government one, that is increasing. So you are having some important shifts between these education systems at these crucial points, which is the end of the primary cycle and the end of the upper primary cycle. So we don't have a uniform system, so to speak. We have quite a fluid kind of transition. Let's look at the poverty line. In the government schools, the left-hand bar, you see that 44% or so are below poverty line. I said 40%, that's average for the last 4-5 years. This is for 1 year. You look at the private unaided, the third column from the left, about 7% are below poverty line. Well, you'll say, okay, they all pay fees, so that's natural, etc. But that has an implication, right? We're talking of really distinct social groups between these different types of schools. Okay, I was not expecting that level of segregation, let's say. If you look at the NSS data, which is household survey based, okay, now we are looking not at the school data, household survey based, you see that the bottom 20% households, the left-hand bar, 70% of children go to government schools. Okay, only 12% go to unaided. Okay. The top 20% households, that's the right-hand bar, you see that 26% go to government schools, 43% go to unaided schools, and so on. So again, you see the segregation between the poorest and the richest households. Now, even more interesting for me, this distribution of schools by the percentage of below poverty line students in a school. Okay, this is based on the census data. If you look at the top panel, let's look at the bottom panel first. That's the unaided schools. You see the big bar on the left, which says most of the schools have 0% below poverty line students. Okay, and very few have more than 25, etc., etc. Look at the top panel, the state government schools. Again, there's a significant number that don't have any poor kids. Okay, it's almost 600 of them. Okay, but then the rest of the distribution is that you have quite a lot actually that have over 50% BPL. Okay, so there's a lot of government schools that have more than 50% of their student population which are poor. Okay, but there's some government schools that have no poor. Which are those? Well, we'll have to look at those, but they are probably very similar to the unaided schools. So we have segregation between the systems and within these systems also in terms of economic composition. If you look at social composition, and I'll wrap up very soon, you'll see that the government schools have much more of the ST, SC, OBC, and in fact, particularly of the ST and SC than compared to the unaided schools. Let's look at language. So the private unaided schools, 85% are teaching in English as the only medium. And we know that is the main attraction, okay? But let us look at now whether they teach in English and in Malayalam. And you see even state government schools, look at the bottom, 67% are offering both English and Malayalam. And government aided also is like that. Private unaided just don't offer in Malayalam. So what is happening here is that you have a lot of children who are in government schools, about 40% who are learning in a mixture of English and Malayalam. We don't know. They're mainly poor. They're mainly of the disadvantaged communities. And you have unaided schools. And then you have children shifting from unaided schools to government schools after elementary and after lower primary. So we are talking about really a complex system. And is our policy really only for government and aided schools, or are we also talking about unaided schools? Should resources that we will be talking about be developed in English, Malayalam, or both? What language should we teach children about conceptual knowledge about climate change? Localized curricula are very important, as we noted, from district level information. And so when you take this whole complexity, I think, what is the kind of research agenda that we should develop for this education system? Okay. And the last point I want to make is, though I tried to collect information on the climate resilience of education infrastructure and facilities, actually could not find anything, neither in the UDICE data nor anywhere else. And I hope there are other data sets that can help us to answer this question. So I'll just conclude with that.